Greetings, class, and welcome to the final lecture video for Finance 101 in the semester. I wanted to make a couple of announcements and talk about some things related to the final exam and some final matters in wrapping up the course. So, by way of announcements, first of all, please complete the course evaluations. There will be an extra credit opportunity for that, and it's dependent on at least 70% of the class responding to that course evaluation. If we get a response rate that's at 70% in the class, I will grant everyone 10 extra credit points for that. So be sure to get the course evaluation done. And the more of you that respond, uh, obviously, at least 70%, then everyone gets some extra credit. The other thing I want to mention is with the final exam, it will be available next Monday, starting at 8 a.m. It will require Respondus browser and monitor. It will be a lot like the last exam that we did. However, for the final exam, we're only going to cover chapters 6 through 10. Those last 5 chapters in the book. We are not going to go back to chapters 1 through 5. So this is a non-cumulative final exam. It only covers the last 5 chapters in the book, so you don't have to go back to the first 5 to prepare for this. Another thing I'm including in the final review module, which really doesn't have much in it now, well, it doesn't have anything in it right now, but it will be appearing here later today, and that will be a final review practice quiz. The final review practice quiz is designed to help you prepare for the final exam. There will also be a document with final exam terminology in it, and basically just which is like a study guide for you. So if you have any other questions about any of the material or any questions about the final exam, let me know. But right now, I'm going to go into the PowerPoint and talk about what's basically the material. We'll review what you need to be aware of for the final exam. So this is the final exam review PowerPoint slide. These will be also available in the final review module after I finish with these today. So to start with, we're going to go back to chapter 6 and talk about loans. One of the things out of chapter 6 that's very important to know is the difference between mainstream financial service providers and alternative financial service providers. So like banks, credit unions, and other mainstream institutions where you can go get a loan if you need to are there. The alternative financial providers are check cashers, money order providers, and payday lenders. These are going to be very expensive alternatives, and but they are out there. But just know that these are extremely expensive, and well, with a payday lender in particular, interest rates can be as high as 1,000% on the money borrowed. So you need to be very careful about alternative financial service providers. A credit card is basically a loan. It's a revolving credit loan of it's a revolving line of credit. You have a certain amount of limited funds available, and you can charge it up to a certain amount. Um, and basically, whenever you choose, whenever you want to, whenever you need to. Um, Credit cards are usually necessary if you're going to rent a car or if you go travel, um, book an airline or some kind of a travel ticket that you need to use. You'll need to use a credit card for. If you rent a car, you'll need a credit card in order to actually get the car. Um, and it's also very common for them when you present your card to rent a car to put some kind of a temporary charge on the card until you return the vehicle. It's sort of like a security deposit. Um, if you're having difficulty getting credit, if you don't have any credit, you've never borrowed money before, or something like that, oftentimes a lender will take a cosigner on your account in order to issue you either a credit card like they show here, or some kind of a loan. Now, this is often done when somebody's starting out and they don't have any credit, but it can also be a way for a lender to loan you money if if you really don't have much of a credit record. So this can happen at any time, but cosigner is an individual that basically guarantees repayment of the debt if the person who signs on the loan doesn't pay it back. Like I mentioned before, there's a difference between low and high cost consumer loans. The mainstream lenders here are banks, credit unions. You can also get auto manufacturing financing. So, like if you go to the dealership and you want to buy a new car, I know that GM, Ford, uh, Honda, all the major car companies have some kind of manufacturing financing available. And they will, by the way, those manufacturing financing will not be as inexpensive as a bank, but it won't be terribly expensive. It won't be as expensive as going to one of these alternative lenders. Credit card issuers, the interest rates are higher there. And there are also companies, remember, that issue their own credit cards, like Kohl's, and I believe Target still does as well. So those companies, they issue these credit cards with the idea that if a customer has one, they'll come in the store, they'll do more shopping, but they also send out monthly bills, and they work just like a regular credit card, except it's only good at that particular retailer. The alternative lenders are extremely expensive to borrow from, like a check casher or payday lender. Uh, a check casher many times will cash your check for a substantial fee. Um, this is probably a lot less common now than it used to be, but what is more common now is the payday lenders or title loan companies where they basically loan you money, and it's a very high rate of interest in order for you to get a loan if you need one. A pawn shop will give you a loan on some merchandise that you leave in the pawn shop, but you have to go back and reclaim that in order to basically get your merchandise back. Also, seller finance used car loans. This is like Oak Motors or JD Byrider. This is a buy here, pay here kind of arrangement. Usually, these loans are expensive and they don't rely necessarily on your credit history as much. But there is at one of those companies, they are financing their own sales of their cars. So they sell the car to you, they finance it right there, and you go back and you pay there. It's not going to be a bank or a loan company. So when you're purchasing a car, remember that you want to think about what your needs are as far as what you need for transportation. How much can you afford? What kind of a car uh, can you actually afford to pay the payments on? Um, Shop around for a loan before you actually go look for the car, because once you shop for the loan, then you can go in and make a very good deal on the car, or negotiate with some degree of confidence that you've already got this financing worked out. And by the way, if you do that, you get a better deal on the car, typically. Um, but anyway, go through some research. Don't just go, okay, well, I like the way that one looks. Maybe that's not a real reliable vehicle, but you want to look at a vehicle that will meet your needs and your budget. You can also, and you also should do this, look at how much the insurance is going to cost you for a specific vehicle that you're going to buy, and then go out and actually shop for the vehicle and negotiate the price that you want to pay. Um, now, this is about renting a home versus buying a home. We're moving into another phase of lending here. And if we're looking at renting an apartment or a house, you're going to have an application deposit that you typically will pay, especially for an apartment complex. You'll pay a security deposit. Basically, that guarantees the landlord that you're not going to damage and move out, because if you do, they get to keep that security deposit. Many times, if you're moving into an apartment, there's a separate pet deposit that they will ask you for as well. And then, if you decide to move out before the lease is over, there is typically a reletting fee or a lease breaking fee, as they refer to it sometimes. And these can be substantial. Um, One of the things you need to think about, though, if you're going to rent an apartment or rent a home, is that you should have renter's insurance to cover any lost or damaged property that would result in, let's say, there's a fire or some kind of an accident. You may need this insurance to cover that in that incident. In those cases, the length of a mortgage is typically uh, the old standard tradition was 30 years. You had a 30-year mortgage, you pay on it for 30 years, and over time, the longer the time, the more interest you pay. See, this green area is an interest that you're going to pay on a 30-year mortgage. If you can go with a 15-year mortgage, you see the huge difference in interest payments. You pay much less in interest over a 15-year period because you're paying down the principal faster. Um, Now, one of the things, and this is kind of shifting out of chapter 6 now into chapter 7, where we start talking about saving. And one of the things that one of the reasons you save money is so you have an emergency fund. And you want to figure out what that emergency fund should be. So you figure out what your monthly living expenses are, minus any taxes or anything that's not as. You go look at your monthly expenses. What are they now? And then you take out those things that are not essential, things that you could do without, or things that you could get rid of if you didn't really need, if you didn't have the money for those at a particular time. If you went into an emergency situation, essentials are going to be things like mortgage or rent, insurance, car payments, groceries, utilities, things like that. You'll want to look at your assets that you have. What do you already have in cash and savings or in a checking account? And then you calculate the emergency fund ratio. You divide the assets you have by the monthly living expenses. This will tell you how long that emergency fund will last you should you run into an unpredictable situation. Typically, they say, and you see in the notes here, between 3 and 6 months for an emergency fund. When we're talking about saving, one of the things to think about when we save money and we build that emergency fund, there is an opportunity cost because we're putting that money in the bank and we're not spending it. The opportunity cost that we talk about is whatever we're giving up in order to get that emergency fund built. So we may be sacrificing, instead of taking a trip that we might look good, might look very interesting or exciting. Well, instead of doing that, we're going to put the money in the bank. That's an opportunity cost. We're giving that up in order to have this emergency fund later. However, if you don't have the emergency fund, there's also an opportunity cost there if you run into a situation where you need that money and you don't have it. Because then you have that opportunity cost is you don't have the money that you need when you need it. There's also some things to consider about financial fraud and identity theft, and this is also out of chapter 7. Financial fraud is where somebody deceives you with a promise of something, and you give them some money and they don't really come through for you. Financial fraud is an intentional and willful misleading of somebody to get their money. This happens, one of the more common ones that you've heard of, I'm sure, is the email that comes from somebody who says they have a relative in another country who died and left millions of dollars, and they just need you to help them get that money out of the country. It will cost you a certain amount of money, but if you do that, they will issue you a check from the proceeds from the money they're about to get. This is an elaborate fraud because the money doesn't exist that they're promising you. And many times, what these folks will do is they'll issue a check that isn't any good to you to help cover, they say they're going to help you cover the fees that you're paying them. But that check they issue you isn't any good. It will bounce. You won't have any money. You'll also lose whatever you give to them in the process. Now, identity theft is a little different from financial fraud because this is where somebody will take your identity and pretend to be you. And in that case, they go out and they charge up. Basically, they'll take your some of your identity and they'll charge up a credit card in your name. They'll run up other loans in your name and so forth. And basically, they use your identity in order to get that. And that basically is the way they get that. They borrow money, they get new cars or whatever, and they basically do it by stealing an identity. A pyramid scheme is one kind of a financial fraud. And probably the most famous of these is recently Bernie Madoff, who said he was investing his clients' money, but actually what he was doing was he was taking the new investors' money and using it to pay returns on his first investors. So what they do is they basically promise a sizable share of money to these people who are buying into this or putting their money with an investment or whatever. They say, we're going to give you a 10% return or 15% or whatever it is. And you give them your money and they take that money and they basically pay the 10 or 15% to the earlier members who they basically recruited early on. This can also be done like a commission or a network marketing scheme where you basically recruit new people to come in, and the people who were there first make money off of those new people. Uh, but the idea is if you want to make money, you have to recruit more people, more people, more people, and basically the people who were in it first earn the money. The people who come last don't really earn anything. This is very lucrative to those who are at the top of the pyramid, like they say here. But if you're coming in later, most people are not going to have that kind of financial success. Also, once you wind up saturating the market, this pyramid scheme will collapse. Telemarketing fraud occurs when somebody misrepresents themselves on a phone call. They tell you there's somebody or someone else. I'm calling to inform you you've won a free gift is a great example. And the reality is, no one ever does that. When I was very young, a teenager, I think, well, no, I was a teenager, I got one of these calls. I believed it. And basically, they sent me a bill for my free gift. I went to an attorney and I got out of that because I was under the legal age, and they were not able to pursue me for that what they claimed I owed them. But again, I hired an attorney to deal with that, and this is a very, by the way, the telemarketing fraud is a very common one. It's going on now. It's probably expanded even since then. So how do you protect yourself from fraud? Well, just be very skeptical. You know, don't believe that there's some rich relative in another country who left millions of dollars. And so why would this person come to you to help get that money? Be skeptical about the things you hear. And also ask for something in writing before you actually do anything, so you can evaluate what it is that they're telling you. Once you actually read it, you usually are pretty well aware that, okay, this is not real. Um, the facts of identity theft, these are some very interesting statistics from the Department of Justice, but at least nearly 18 million households have had at least one person who's over 12 experience identity theft. That's a lot of people. Um, 35% of all households in the U.S. have experienced a misuse or theft from a bank, savings, or utility account. I can tell you that I have experienced that. I received a statement from my bank one time, and I looked at it, and right there on one, well, it wasn't a statement, it was online, but one of the charges on my account was for something out in California, basically a charge out there, and I had not been to California, so contacted the bank immediately and told them this was a theft, a fraud, and we were able to get that rectified right away. By the way, the losses that are occurring because of this exceed $13 billion a year. Okay, that's chapter 7. Now we're moving into chapter 8, where we talk about stocks. Just be aware of what a stock is. A stock is a slice of ownership in a company. A piece of ownership in a company is a stock. When you buy a stock, you have equity in the company. They're sold in shares. So you have a certain number of shares that are available. You buy a share of stock, you have one share in that company. And usually companies who are larger have millions of shares issued and outstanding. Publicly traded stocks you can follow on the market regularly. You can go out to the market, the stock market, and purchase them. They're for sale all the time. I mean, they have shares being sold and purchased all the time. Now the market being where it is, there's probably a lot more for sale than there is that people are buying. But publicly traded stocks basically um, they have an abbreviation in the market. It's their symbol, and if you know which one is which, you can follow those companies and see how their stocks are doing in the market. Privately held stocks are not available to anybody outside the small group where they own it. So you have a number of people in a family who own all of the stock available. Um, that's what typically happens in Indiana. The Holman family owned all of the shares of Clabber Girl baking powder. That's an example. They established that company a long time ago. They still, or well, last I heard, they still owned it. Some of the things that they had were being sold off, but that was one of the things that only they were able to buy shares of stock in that, the family members. So usually when you buy stock, you're looking at different types of stock based on the kind of company that you're buying into. A growth stock is usually a company that's starting up with a great deal of promise, that there's some expectation that the stock price is going to go up um, and will continue to increase. This growth stock company is not necessarily about paying you dividends, but they're talking about future value of the shares. And then there's an income stock type that you're going to look at, and many people may go into this and say, okay, I want to have a regular source of income. So they buy shares in a company that's very well established, but also a company that's well known for paying out large dividends or paying out dividends on a regular basis. Sometimes you get into stocks that have a combination of the two characteristics. They're both growth stocks and income stocks. Um, and that can be, you can find that. Another kind of a security, other than stock is a bond. Now, a stock is an ownership share in a company, but a bond is something a company issues to borrow money. Many companies borrow large sums of money that an individual bank would not be able to issue. For example, when I was in auditing, there was a hospital that wanted to build on, and in order to build on to their hospital, they needed to issue bonds that were, I think, around $35 million in order to do the project that they wanted. So they issue these bonds through an underwriter. The underwriter looks at the company, says, okay, this is what your bonds are going to be worth. I'll help you issue them. And the face value on the bond, on each one of the bonds, typically is $1,000. Bonds are normally sold in those denominations. Um, and so the face value, or the value that's on the front of the bond, if there's a bond document, it's on the front of the document, it's going to be the $1,000. The maturity date is when the bond actually is paid off by the company. And typically, for these large bonds, it's going to be a long period of time. Say it'll be 20 years, 15 years, something like that. But that's the maturity date of the bond. And then they have a coupon rate on the bond, and that is actually the interest rate that the bond pays. So if you had a 6% coupon rate, that means that on that $1,000 bond, the company is going to pay you 6% interest every 6 months on that bond. Okay, typically it's bonds are paid every 6 months. The coupon payment is how much you actually get in interest when they pay those payments. So if you took a $1,000 bond, you paid 6% on that, you get $60 a year. Typically, what that works out to for the coupon payment would be $30 every 6 months. Okay, now another kind of investment is a mutual fund. One of the ways to be safer in the stock market is not to go in and purchase a individual share of stock or a specific company's stock, but rather to go into a mutual fund where you have an investment portfolio in a number of different companies, and basically you purchase a share of the mutual fund. And when you purchase a share of the mutual fund, you own a piece of each one of the companies that's in the mutual fund. So, in this way, what they do is they diversify your investment. That is, if one company has a bad year, not necessarily will all of the companies in that mutual fund have a bad year. In fact, the idea here is to protect yourself against a bad investment in one particular company, or one company having a bad year and not affecting your overall investment portfolio that much. Mutual funds also pool all individual investors' money. So you may have a mutual fund, and you'll have a lot of different investors in that. And basically what that means is the mutual fund will pool all that money together to buy those shares that are owned by the mutual fund. So when you purchase into a mutual fund, basically you're buying a piece of all the shares that mutual fund owns. Well, you're buying a share in the mutual fund, but that's also a part of each one of those shares is in that mutual fund share. So you're really diversifying because you have more uh, investments spread out, and you don't have everything in all. The way they used to say this, you don't have all your eggs in one basket. So that covers the stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Now we're getting into the insurance and risk management. When we talk about insurance and risk management, some of the things that we do, our health behavior impacts our health in a greater way than any other thing we can do. So you have genetic disposition here and some other things, but the biggest slice of this pie is our health behavior. What do we do that keeps us healthy? And here in this risk matrix, you can see the frequency of something happening along with the severity. So if it's a high frequency, high severity event, then you need to avoid it if possible. If it's a medium, uh, happen sometimes, and it's still a high risk, you want to avoid that as well. If it's here in the medium range, you may manage the risk somehow. You may try to manage your risk with that and say, okay, I'm going to take some protective measures and help avoid some of these situations, but also I'm going to purchase insurance to help cover me in the event something like this happens. Health expenses are, well, we have very large health expenses in this country. We do have a very large um, industry basically in healthcare. And so, one of the things that we need to talk about here is how that insurance works, how healthcare works. So, if we're back here in this risk matrix and we're in a medium area, we may take precautionary measures, but we may also purchase insurance against these high severity events. And they don't happen very often, but they're high severity events um, in order to avoid some of those costs. Well, health expenses, uh, when we talk about those, we're talking about healthcare insurance. And basically, it's a financial tool that allows us to shift the risk to a healthcare insurance company. And I spent my career working for Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they basically are one of those healthcare companies. Health insurance is what they offer, and they're helping people um, transfer that risk to them and pool their money, their resources, in order to get a higher degree of healthcare coverage. A monthly premium is what you pay every month, like a payment for the insurance. A deductible is what you would have to pay if you went into the hospital and you would have to meet a minimum level of expense on your own in order to cover that deductible. Um, Co-insurance is something that you would share with the insurance company. Basically, it means that you are sharing the cost of that expense with the health insurance company. That's not the same thing as a copay. A copay is a flat fee every time you use a service. So, for example, with a co-insurance, you may say, I have to pay 20% of the bill in an emergency room because that's my co-insurance. A co-payment is what you would pay a flat fee to. So, like you went to the doctor, and if you had a copay every time you went to the doctor of $50, you'd have to pay that every time you went to the doctor. The out of pocket maximum, these are the amounts, the total amount of deductibles and co-insurance that you have to pay. So when you hit this out of pocket maximum for deductibles and co-insurance, not for co-payments, but for deductibles and co-insurance, you stop paying the deductible and co-insurance at that point. And the health insurance company then pays all of the medical bills. Health insurance plans basically come in different types, different varieties. Preferred provider organization is a fee for service plan. It's the most flexible plan, but it's also the most expensive because basically you don't have as many limitations as who you can see, and basically the insurance company does not negotiate the same does not have the same leverage to negotiate the fees with a wider group of physicians or providers. Um, one of the more popular plans available today is a high deductible healthcare plan, which means basically you get reduced premiums, but you pay higher levels of medical expense out of pocket. So you have a much higher deductible when you go into it. So, for example, if you had a high deductible healthcare plan that had a $5,000 um, deductible on it, that means that you would have to pay $5,000 in a year of deductibles before the insurance company would start to pay. That is an example, and that's why the premiums are lower. A health maintenance organization is another kind of an insurance plan that was started basically to try and keep the costs lower, but in a health maintenance organization, what happens is you can only go to a specific physician or a specific group of physicians, and you're limited. You can't go outside that group. So basically, this is what we call managed care. That is, the insurance company has an agreement with a particular physician group, and you have to go to that group in order to get service. Okay, that's chapter 9. That's covering insurance and risk. We're now in chapter 10, which is the final chapter. We're talking about retirement and Social Security. Know that Social Security has been around a long time, since 1937. It's considered a pay-as-you-go program, meaning that the taxes that are paid in are also paid out to individuals who are beneficiaries under the plan. So if you're receiving Social Security, the people paying into the system are those that are making it possible for you to receive your benefits. There's a formula to the calculation of the benefit, and basically it's based on the highest 35 years of earnings adjusted for wage growth. It doesn't necessarily mean that the more income you make, the higher your benefit's going to be, but Social Security is basically a minimum floor that you want to think about. This is like okay, this is well, Social Security doesn't pay a whole lot, but it is kind of a safety net or minimum floor. So now if we're talking about what you need to save for retirement, we need to think about, okay, well, how do you want to live in retirement? And what is your average annual income right now? If you have an average career income of $23,000 a year, and you start saving at age 25, you can save 7.2% of your income from that point forward, and you'll wind up with $178,250 in retirement. That will cover this kind of an annual income in retirement. You can see the more income you make, the higher the percentage of savings you need to be contributing if you want to maintain this kind of a lifestyle. So let's say you were making 78,000 a year on average, you should be saving 11% if you started at age 25. If you start at 45, you should save 38%. In order to achieve savings of this amount, 936,000. That would provide you this kind of a life, kind of an income in retirement, or you would be able to have that kind of income in retirement. One of the things that's happened to retirement plans over the last 30, 40 years is that many employers have moved away from a defined benefit plan, which basically pays you a specific benefit for life, to a defined contribution plan. And these are what we see here, the 401k, 403b, 457b, and the thrift savings plans. Know what these are. Know what the difference between them are. You know, 401k is different from a 403b because of the people who are eligible to participate. So in a 401k, you're working for a private employer. A 403b, you're working in education, public education. 457b is for employees in state government or local government, and then a thrift savings plan is for employees of the federal government. Okay, when you're talking about investing retirement funds, you want to invest so that your return on an investment is about 4 to 5 percentage points higher than the rate of inflation. One of the ways of doing that is through a mutual fund that has a target date on it basically targeted toward a specific date of retirement. So if you join into a mutual fund, it has a retire that's a basically a target date fund. So let's say it's a target date of 2030. You join it in 2020. Basically, what it's going to do is look at your investments for the next 10 years and plan and change those investments as if you're retiring in 2030. That means by the time you get to 2030, almost all of your investments are going to be in very safe investments, not necessarily in stocks or riskier investments. Even though they would pay higher, the reason is you don't have time to recover from a loss like that. Another way to save for retirement is through a traditional IRA. And this way, what you do is you put money into a bank or some a bank, a credit union, or even an insurance company into an IRA. When you do that, basically they take that money and they put it into this account that it earns a certain amount of interest. The benefit of doing that is that you get to you don't pay taxes on the money you put into an IRA up front, a traditional IRA. You do pay taxes on the money when you take it out, but you can't take it out when you start saving in an IRA. You cannot take any money out before age 59 and a half. If you do, you pay a penalty. There are certain exceptions, but typically you're going to pay a penalty on that if you take it out before you're that age. There are also different kinds of financial professionals. Know what the difference between these are. For example, a financial planner is different from a counselor in that the counselor is there to help you fix a problem. A planner is there to help you plan for the future. And know what these different terms mean. So, a financial advisor would be somebody who would give you advice and suggestions. Tax advisor, somebody who's interested in helping you save money on your tax return. And a legal advisor would be somebody you go to for legal help, to do legal documents and so forth. And finally, remember, this is the difference between financial counseling and financial planning. The counselor is short term, focused on what happened, helping you take care of a problem or some kind of an issue. Financial planner is looking out in the future and saying, okay, here's what's coming. Let's plan for this. So this is the lecture video to cover the exam review material. I have covered a lot here. And I will post this PowerPoint in Canvas. And again, like I said, there will be a practice exam available as well. So make sure that you take a look at the PowerPoints, review the study guide, which is really going to be a terminology worksheet where you can go in and look at those different terms and make sure you know what they are. And then make sure you take the practice exam before we actually have the exam starting Monday. Well, take care, and I hope you have